Alright, and this time the audio and visual should be synced, because I'm not wearing the earbuds. But, again, my name is Micah Malone. This is some of the old history essays that I wrote during junior year of high school, and I've been reading them. This is the third one. This one is covering the time period from 1837 to 1865, and it's called Americans Fight for Glory. Alright, let me get started. What do you desire to be remembered for? During the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, an African-American regiment of the United States Army unsuccessfully attempted to storm the Confederate States of America's Fort Wagner in South Carolina. Their story, however, is more significant than that one failed engagement in the history of the United States of America. It is a story of necessary change and displays the glory of Americans fighting for their country. The 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment was assembled in 1863 on the heels of the United States government passing the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the nation's first force of African American soldiers to be officially recognized by the Department of War. It was preceded by the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry, August 1862, and the 1st South Carolina Volunteer Infantry, November 1862. Both of which were not approved by the U.S. government. The governor of Massachusetts, John A. Andrew, was an abolitionist in favor of creating the 54th and later the 55th Regiment. He sought out abolitionist Union officers that held beliefs similar to his, and he positioned them to command the regiment into battle. Captain Robert Gould Shaw, who was a Harvard graduate and a veteran of the Battle of Antietam, was chosen to guide and prepare the 54th for war against the Confederate States of America. On May 28, 1863, the regiment was deployed from Boston and ventured south into the CSA. Although they had been thoroughly trained and were ready to face the enemy, the 54th was originally, on account of their skin color, assigned to manual labor details, such as clearing roads and building Allied fortifications. The men's true potential as United States soldiers was embraced after they displayed courage when they fought their first victorious battle against the Southerners on July 16, 1863, at James Island. More memorable, however, was their courageous and valiant, but ultimately unsuccessful, second battle. In 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union, inspiring Southern states to follow its example. The capital city of Charleston, in particular, became symbolic of Southern might and pride, leading to the North seeking to capture it in order to raise Allied morale. Northern Brigadier General Quincy A. Gilmore was directed by his superiors in Washington to subdue the CSA's honored city. South of the city was Fort Wagner, a Confederate stronghold that stood on a 55-mile-long strip of beach and overlooked the Atlantic Ocean to the east and a marsh to the west. The stronghold itself was protected by 4 walls of sand and earth that towered up to 30 feet above the ground and were armed in sharp, protruding wooden stakes, all of which faced outwards toward the attacker. The land around Fort Wagner was equally treacherous, featuring hidden landmines buried right underneath the sand, ready to explode at any second, and a moat 5 feet deep and 10 feet wide, directly within range of CSA fire from over the wall. As it guarded the only entrance to Charleston Harbor from the sea, Fort Wagner had to fall before Charleston could be taken. The First Battle of Fort Wagner, on July 11, 1863, pitted U.S. soldiers against both the structure's hostile defenses and CSA soldiers, and the northern defeat left Gilmore with an undermanned force. The 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment was called upon in the wake of the battle from the nearby James Island to aid Gilmore in his attempt to subdue the structure. At 7:45 on July 18, 1863, the regiment led the Union charge ahead of Gilmore's remaining forces to storm Fort Wagner. The attack began in 2 movements, with the 54th moving up the west side of the fort and the remaining units attacking the south side. The 54th deployed for the 54th deployed for the assault on Fort Wagner in 2 lines of 5 companies each, followed by the remainder of the Union. They stormed and captured the outer rifle pits surrounding the fort. Colonel Shaw led his men through the moat and up the side of the wall to the parapet. When Colonel Shaw reached the top, he waved his sword and called, "Onward, 54th." Just at that moment, he was struck and killed by gunfire. The soldiers of the 54th were soon beaten back after hand-to-hand combat with Confederate soldiers at the parapet and along the walls. The 54th fought valiantly and bravely, but they were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempt to aid Gilmore in capturing Fort Wagner, and all Union soldiers retreated from the structure and the area around it. The U.S. suffered the loss of 1,515 men of their original 5,000-man force, in comparison to the 174 CSA deaths. While the battle was unsuccessful for the U.S. and the CSA stronghold stood, the exploits of the Massachusetts Regiment would not be forgotten. The impact of the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment went well beyond the Battle of Fort Wagner. They were a force for change as well as a force for the Union. Got a random blank page in here. I don't know why that's there. Anyways. I hope that's not, hang on. Okay, yeah, that's not a failed, page that failed to print or anything. Alright. Fort Wagner survived the initial 2 assaults against it. Bombardments from offshore U.S. naval vessels doomed the structure, which finally succumbed to the north on September 7th, 1863, in no small part due to the efforts of the 54th to break the defenses of the stronghold. The honored city of the CSA, Charleston, South Carolina, fell on February 18th, 1865. The regiment also fought against discrimination within the United States Armed Forces by demanding equal pay from the government, $13 per month. They were granted fair pay in June 1864. The presence of the 54th in the U.S. Army inspired many other African Americans to join the military. By 1865, the number of African Americans in the Army had increased to close to 200,000 men, translating into roughly 10% of men in the Union Army from 1863 to 1865 being African American. Sergeant William H. Carney, a member of the 54th, who was born enslaved in Virginia but later escaped to New Bedford, Massachusetts, with the aid of the Underground Railroad, participated in the Second Battle of Fort Wagner in 1863. He was injured while saving the United States flag from capture. In 1900, he was the first African American person to be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, bestowed to him by Theodore Roosevelt. The men of the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment did more than impact the outcome of the battles at Fort Wagner. They served as a force for change in the United States, and their story displays the glory of Americans fighting for their country. All right, and that is the paper. All right, and thanks for listening.